All right, we're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. And Harold, you may take it from here, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Prong. Board members and fellow staff members and guests, we want to appreciate you coming to our workshop this afternoon on our budget. As I think most of you are aware, earlier this month the governor proposed his budget, which still has to go through a number of different machinations before it becomes complete. But we wanted to make sure that our school community got an update as soon as possible in terms of what that budget proposal means to us in education. And so we're very fortunate this evening to have with us Ron Bennett, who is the Chief Executive Officer from School Services of California and one of the most respected leaders in the state, particularly in this area. And Ron and I have had a chance to talk a little bit, and he's comfortable, and board, this will be up to you, but he's comfortable taking questions intermittently or waiting till the end, whichever meets your needs or the community's best. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ron. Thank you, Ron, for being here.
Thank you, Ron.
And we'll leave it to the board to decide how you want to do the questions, but sometimes when you're dealing with different subjects, 20 minutes later the question is hard to remember and go back to. Is this thing hot?
I think the board is not afraid to stop whenever
That's
they
good.
have a question.
All right, good. Okay, so is this microphone on? Okay. We have more microphones than they had in the White House the last time I was there. So we should be able to be heard. Yes. Okay. So let's just talk about the purpose of the presentation today. So we have been around the state. We've been doing presentations ever since the governor's budget was announced a week ago Friday. We have boiled down the impact on public education. In the presentation tonight, we have a lot of information about the state in general. We have some information about your district specifically, but Sandra has done. I'm sorry, I said the wrong name. Janet has done a great job of putting the numbers together and helping me put this presentation together. And so Janet will need to take the information from the governor's budget and digest it a little bit and then convert it to your district, but she does that really well. And so I think that you'll see more details rolling out. When the budget comes out, it comes out on this year, January 9th, but the trailer bills don't come out for a couple of weeks. And the trailer bills have all the details in them. So we'll be writing articles that talk about the details, and today we'll talk about the programs in general, but for a lot of them, the details simply are not out. And so we'll get those to your staff, and then Janet will make the calculations for your district and let you know how they affect you.
Are you in that same group that's going to be presenting at our Roy C. Hill Center on the 23rd? Because we have some people coming down from Sacramento, and they're going to be doing
Not on the 23rd. That's not us. And yeah, we are not doing the 23rd. We're always out a couple of weeks before anybody else. So, and then we see our materials played back to us by others, but that's okay. Yeah. So, yes, sir.
Just in general, because I know in here you talk a lot about the governor's proposal. In past history, when they really had like different split house, you know, it meant something that Republicans thought something else, and so it might be some big changes. Do you think the legislature is going to pretty much go along with the governor's proposal?
I think that the governor gets exactly what he wants. Right. And we've got a supermajority in both houses still. We don't have 2/3, but we have well over 50. Right. The budget is a 50% vote. Right. The governor may compromise on a few things along the way, but if he does, it'll be because that's what he wants. Exactly. He's got the votes like he did last year to get exactly what he wants.
Thank you.
Okay? All right, so with that, if you open the hymnal there to page 2, this is one of the best years that we've ever had for public education. And I need to remind you that the governor's January budget is for 15-16. It is not for the current year. But in recent years, governors have changed the current year as well. So we're always a little bit wary about the January budget. If there were cuts to be made, They would have been made in January. But because there were additions for the current year, I'll talk about the way the governor handles those. I should keep up with this thing over here. Okay, so, sure, that'd be great. What the governor does is he says there's more money for the current year, 14-15. I owe education about $2 billion, a little more than that. And I owe education for next year another $2.5 billion. And so for the current year, the governor spends the money on one-time purposes in the current year. And your district doesn't get any change in the current year. But then for next year, Proposition 98 only goes up $2.5 billion, but the governor applies $4 billion. So that's how the governor uses the money one time the first time he gets it, ongoing the second time. So it's 1.5 from this year and 2.5 from next year. And I'll be going back to that as we talk, because the governor is going to spend a lot more money in 15-16 than he gets in 15-16 because he still owes us for 14-15.
So the July 30th memo of cutting back 30%, did he replenish that, or will that be replenished?
It will be. So just to recount, in June, when you adopted your budget last
Right,
year,
correct.
you were told to expect a little less than 30% for the current year.
Right.
And 30% for 15-16.
Correct.
3 weeks after you adopted your budget, the state said, oh, we didn't mean that. We don't have enough money to do that. You're going to get a little less than 30% for 14-15, but not 30%, only 20% for 15-16.
Right.
This budget takes that 20% back up to 32. And so it restores everything the governor cut last summer and a little bit more.
Okay, great.
Okay?
Thank you.
All right. So it takes till 2021 before we get back the purchasing power that we had in 2007-8. So we started getting cut in 8-9, and those cuts remain. A substantial amount of those cuts, $5.5 billion, are still in the education budget. So we're still lower than where we would be. We have a 7-year recovery plan. We are entering year 3. Okay, so if we go to the next slide, the bar chart that shows the progress toward implementation, the blue bars are the straight line implementation. If the governor did an equal amount every year for 7 years, that's where you would be. The orange bars are what the state is actually funding. So you can see that the state is way ahead. The state today has closed 58% of the gap by year 3. So they're funding the local control funding formula faster than the governor anticipated. Now, when we talk about how the money is distributed, your district is the poster child for the local control funding formula. You have 94% of your students who are generating additional funds. That means that you have a huge need in this community for public education, and the state of California, for the first time, is recognizing that. So you're going to get more than your neighbors every year for this 7-year implementation period, and 15-16 is no exception. So I'm going to show you how much more you're getting. Okay? But you can see that everybody in the state is getting money back faster than the governor projected. Okay? So if we go to the minimum guarantee, current year, the guarantee increases by $2.3 billion over what the governor adopted in June. 2.3. Then the next year, after adding that 2.3, it goes up another $2.5 billion. So that's the $4.8 billion you will hear the state saying that they're adding to education. Because they're not putting the money in as ongoing for the current year, most of the ongoing money is in the second year. And we'll talk about that in a moment. I'll show you where the money's going. The requirements for the state to make up the money are very distinct in the Constitution. The timing of the state to make up the money is not distinct. State has to make up the shortfalls to Prop 98, but on no specific timeline. So right now, the state because of Prop 30, and because the economy is doing better. The state of California is adding back money to education much faster. We took the biggest cuts. We should get the biggest gains. But at the same time, the economy remains volatile, and we should have a plan for what we're going to do if the economy turns down. Let me just talk a little bit on the next slide. Let's do it on the next slide. So on the next slide, what we see is that back in 2007-8, we had $56.6 billion going to public education. And then look at those low numbers coming across through 2011-12. 12-13 is the first year that we got any gains after the recession started. Okay, by that time, we should have had cost of living adjustments for 5 years. And so even with the projections that the state has for 15-16, we are still well below where we would be if the state had simply funded cost of living adjustments all the way across and not made the cuts. So we're trying to get our cuts back, trying to get our cost of living adjustments. But when I said I wanted to talk about a topic that isn't in here, the reserves for the district. So a good reserve policy falls in line with local control, and the governor has said, I believe in local control. He has admitted that some special interests that he thought he needed in order to pass Prop 30 wanted him to put into the budget bill a restriction on local boards' abilities to set their own level of reserves, and so that is in state law. It hasn't kicked in yet. There are 4 conditions that need to be met for it to kick in. So it hasn't kicked in, but as a district, you should be extraordinarily worried about this. And let me just explain why. We all want to spend today's dollars on today's kids, but we also don't want to leave ourselves in a position where with 3% minimum state reserves or 2% minimum state reserves, we've got either 4 or 6 days payroll, and on the first day of the next recession, we're laying people off. We're cutting programs for kids. We are doing furlough days. We're doing all those things. A good reserve gives you a buffer so that you can plan for changes so that they affect students the least. Left to their own devices, school boards across the state have built up reserves in order to make it through this bad time. And so school district reserves have been high. School districts reserves at the end of this year are going to be even higher. My prediction. Why are they going to be higher? Because districts like yours have been given a lot of money at the last minute, right before school started, under a new funding system with a requirement to develop a new plan and start up a lot of new programs from a standing start. And so what I'm seeing around the state is that these programs are implemented halfway through the school year, or they're ramped up a little bit during the school year, and all of the money that's going to be spent on them isn't spent in the first year. In the second and third year, probably spend all the money, but not in the first year. So as you think about your reserve policy should be yours. We should get a repeal of the language that the state currently has that restricts your reserves. And then if you decide you want to carry a low reserve, do it, if you want to take that risk. If you want to carry a higher reserve, do it. Take a little less risk. But for districts like yours that are planning on 15% and more increases each year, you can see that when you do a 3-year, multi-year projection, you're counting on a lot of new money. And if the economy turns down or the state stiffs us again, you have a long way to fall. I'm going to be in a district tomorrow that is a 20% district. Your 94% of your kids generate more money. This 20% district is getting almost nothing. If they get nothing instead of almost nothing, they won't notice so much. But if you get nothing instead of 15% and 15% and 15%, you're going to drop like a rock, and it would be cataclysmic for the programs for your kids. So what we say is, the board should set the reserve, but in a district like yours, we would want at least 1 year's worth of the LCFF gain to be set aside in reserve, just so that you have a buffer if the economy turns down, which it will. I just don't know what year it's going to turn down, but we're going to have a recession between now and 2021 for sure. My record on predicting recessions, by the way, is a little spotty. I have predicted 10 of the last 2 recessions. So if there's any doubt, I predict a recession. And then I tell people it's like the raincoat and the umbrella I carry in the trunk of my car. 340 days I don't need them, but on the 25 I need them, I'm ready. And so carrying a good reserve, being prepared for that next downturn, you don't get to say, well, I'll save up a little money after the recession starts. You've got to be prepared.
What would you recommend? What would you recommend for the size of our district?
So your district, the statewide average for reserves has typically been about 12%. Your district, under the old rules, I would have said 12% or so, because you would have been about average. What I would say now is that you need more than that because of the volatility that you're getting from those high revenue increases. Remember that we project out for 3 years to decide how much we can spend. If that second or third year comes in badly.
So how much more than 12%?
So what I would say is take 1 year worth of the gains from LCFF and have that somewhere. So if you're getting 15%, I would put 15% somewhere as an LCFF reserve, and then I might carry a 3 or 5% regular reserve, but I'd want that big reserve in case the state has a downturn and you've got a big change.
So 15% of what we get for LCFF?
Right.
Okay.
Plus
Plus the 12%?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. And so that would give you a big enough reserve that the board would have options for what you do in that next downturn. If you don't have a big reserve, you don't have any options.
So are you saying 27%, or are you saying the 3% plus 15%?
Yeah, I think if you had the 3% plus 15%, you'd be just fine.
18%, okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah, the only problem with that is we always project only to have a 2% reserve,
Yes?
but your ending balance is far greater than that.
So,
And so it's totally unexpected. And that, if you look at our history, even in lean times, it turns out the same way. So you have the potential of, instead of having, you say 15%, you'd have 40%
yeah.
in unspent money at the end of the year.
So let's talk about that for just a minute. In normal years, when there isn't a big recession, like the Great Recession, we expect the ending balance, wherever it is projected, to go up a little bit. Why? Because we allocate money to programs. Nobody spends more than they're given, but some programs don't make for that year. We're going to do a textbook adoption. We don't quite get it done. We're going to replace some air conditioning units. We don't quite get it done. It gets carried over into July. The school sites have money. They don't spend it all. They turn it back in for 1 day, and then it gets given to them again for the following year. And so those carryovers affect our ending balance. That part of it is pretty predictable, that we're going to have some of that. But over the past 5 years, if you looked at your reserves, you would say that it looks like a disaster. It looks like a train wreck. Because at the start of the year, the state says, plan for a $500 cut. So you make cuts. Then mid-year, the state says, well, we've decided not to make that cut. So you get your $500 back, and your reserve pops up. But prepare for a cut for the following year of $350. Right? And so you prepare for another cut. And so you're always preparing based on what the state's telling you, and then they're changing, and it makes it look like the individual districts are not doing a good job of managing their reserves, but it's really state policy. So rarely in your district have I seen what I would call a surprise, a big surprise, where somebody calculates the ending balance, and then I look at it later, and I worked with Mohammed for many years on your budget, and I look at it, and these are all predictable things that cause it to be higher, and we want all of our mistakes to be small and positive, but you've had some big positive adjustments, and most of them driven by things beyond your control. But when you're sitting here talking to the community, it looks like you're not spending your money wisely. And so I think it's good to have transparency and to talk about the reserve level, but
on that note, then nothing's changed in terms of when we go through tough times again, you might have those same things occurring.
yes.
So if we would have did what you're talking about now, then you would have had even larger amounts of money at the end of those years that wasn't spent.
I think you might have had less because you started with a pretty hefty reserve, and I think you maintained a pretty good reserve all the way through.
And if you look at even Muhammad's projected budgets in the beginning, he never projected to have those any balances.
Exactly.
So it always came out where you had substantially more left over at the end of the year.
Right.
My only point is, if we all of a sudden now say what you're suggesting is that if maybe I'm reading it wrong. Maybe you're saying it's okay to have a 40% increase or a 40% ending balance versus because you talk about putting away 18% planning.
Right.
So you're saying it's okay to have an ending balance of $100 million there.
So I'm saying, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying
Well,
is
that could happen, though.
that if you plan for 18% and you look at your budgeting system and it turns out that planning for 18 is getting you 40,
Right.
then I would change the plan. And I'd say, okay, well, we're going to estimate revenues higher or expenditures, revenues lower or expenditures higher or something, so that we shouldn't double.
Well, we've been saying that for 19 years. And
Right. Yeah, so we should not double. And so part of it is in the plan. The plan is 1 year's worth of LCFF plus 3 or 5%. That would be a good plan. If the execution of the plan is producing twice that, I'd look at the execution, not at the plan. What are we doing that's causing us to have that much additional money? And because a good reserve policy really doesn't take anything away from students. Once we have the reserve, we can spend 100% of the new money. If we take 18% and put it in a box over here and lock it up, then next year, we don't have to put any money in that box unless we take some out. So we get a new dollar the following year. We don't have to put any of it in reserve. We can spend it all. So a good reserve policy means that we decide what the reserve is, we put it aside, and then if it grows, we know why it grows. And if it's growing and we didn't want it to grow, well, then we change our financial policies so we spend it. Because we want to spend this year's money on this year's kids. And once you get that reserve set aside, after it's set aside, you can basically spend all of the new money on kids. Okay? Comments?
And Board, I just wanted to remind you that agendized this evening for your consideration is a resolution related to the reserves issue. So thank you for commenting on that, Ron.
Okay. All right. I didn't know you had a reserve issue tonight, but I hope some of that helps you and didn't make it worse. Okay. All right. So if we go on to the Prop 98 and the major K-12 proposals, when we close the gap on the local control funding formula, let me tell you what that means. Beginning with 2013-14, the governor announced that he was $18.5 billion underfunded in public education, and that between 13-14 and 2021, he's going to make up $18.5 billion. So the way he makes it up is a percentage of that gap for each district. And so I'm going to show you a gap funding slide that shows where you're going to be in 2021 and how much your individual district gets. But the governor's plan was to put about $2.5 billion against that gap closure every year until the gap was closed. But for 14-15, he put up $4.75 billion, almost twice what he planned. For 2015-16, he's now putting up $4 billion, that first bullet. In June, he was planning on 2.5. Now he's planning on 4. So that's why we're way ahead on implementation of the LCFF. This is portending very, very good things for your district because you are one of the winners. At 94%, not many districts get more than you do. So the faster the governor makes this good, the more years you compound that. Okay? The $1.1 billion in discretionary one-time uses we're going to talk about a little bit more, but that's on top of anything else that you would get. And that's $180 a student. I'll show you some detail on that. The $1 billion to remove the deferrals, that happens at the state level. You don't see that except you get your money, your cash earlier. So you'll see a cash impact of that in your district. The $500 million for adult ed, I'm going to talk about in some detail because that is a big issue for your district and it's a lot of money for you. And the governor made a positive proposal that's going to help you. So I've got some slides on that. The emergency repair program is for facilities because we don't have a state bond. The CTE is Career Technical Education. And I wish Mr. Gallo was here tonight. It is largely as a result of efforts by him and others like him that we have this. He and I have done several presentations together, and we did one at CSBA, and we had the governor's staff in the room. We had almost 300 people in there at Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock. 4 to 5:15. We are the only thing between these people and the bar, and they choose to come to our workshop, right? And he is passionate on this topic and very, very effective. And so we had him, and we had another CEO from a bank, and we had some superintendents, and I was the facilitator for the panel. And the comment that each of us made is that if the state of California doesn't put up some ongoing money for career technical education, it will be dead in 15, 16. And we made that point loudly and over again, and the governor actually picked up on it and put it in. Yes, ma'am.
How will this money be distributed?
So for the
250 million, and also the 273 million.
so the
Or, I mean, I'm sorry, the 500 million.
so let's take them one at a time. The 250 is a competitive grant where you have to put up 50% match. So if you were spending $1 million on career tech, you could put up 500,000 and try to get the other 500 from the state and liberate 500 of your own money. Okay. Or you could say, I'm spending $1 million, I want $1 million grant, and then the program would double for you. Okay. And so it is competitive. In the first year, it's unlikely that the money will be all used because people have to, do their planning and all of that. So I think you'll get it. In the subsequent years, I think there'll be a lot of demand for that money, and I think you'll have to have a good plan, but your district has a good plan.
Right.
So I think you should be at the front of the line for that.
When do you think that the RFP will go out?
So the trailer bill language is due out by the end of this week, and I think that'll specify some dates and application procedures and things like that, but it's not out
And
yet.
deadlines? Okay.
Yeah, we don't have any deadlines yet.
So
now let's go to adult ed. You asked the same question.
Right.
Adult ed is easier. Whatever your maintenance of effort requirement was for 2014-15, you're going to get that much money on top of your LCFF. So this is like a windfall for you. This is money that you did not count on. You're not losing anything out of the LCFF. And Janet, your number is 6 million. So you've got 6 million within the LCFF that you've been paying for adult ed.
Okay.
Now you're going to get another 6 million outside the LCFF. So you could either increase the size of the program, or you could use that 6 million to pay adult ed and get your 6 million back. Okay? So that's kind of the way to think about it.
And
in
what
the
about
first,
the emergency repair program?
So let me just finish the adult ed because I'm covering the next 3 slides right now.
All right.
Okay, so in the first year, the adult ed money goes like I just said it does, based on your MOE. In years 2 and 3, there are community boards that are created, community committees, to decide how the adult ed money will be distributed from year 2 on. And this is ongoing money. So this is not one-time money or anything like that. It continues on. The money is parked over in the community college budget so that the governor does not create a new K-12 categorical. For the emergency repair, that money goes to the State Board of Education, to the State Allocation Board, and then they will allocate it based on need for districts that have emergencies. And you have people on your staff that know this process really well, and when the state's out of money, it still has a constitutional requirement to fix some problems, and this gives it some money to fix them. Okay? So then we have some ADA growth and then 100 million for internet connectivity. That's something that also would be competitive that you'll want to compete for. And we'll have details on that with the trailer bills. Okay, so if I continue on for a minute on the next slide, slide 6, about the career technical education and adult ed. So the state, in my opinion, made a horrible mistake in 2008-9 when it made adult ed and ROP part of those 42 programs that were flexible. These are ADA-based programs that had nothing to do with the K-12 program. They should have been left standalone, but once the state did that, it was impossible for the state to fix it, because if they had taken even one program off that list, all of the programs would come off that list, because there were constituencies that wanted to take all of them off. And everybody thought 39 of them were okay, but mine's not. Okay, take mine off. And so the state didn't fix it then. So now that's led to the erosion of these programs, and the spending statewide on adult ed and career tech is down 50% from where it was 5 years ago. So that's why it was so important that we get some money for it this year. The districts have been required to maintain effort at the 12-13 level through 13-14 and 14-15. Now remember, the 12-13 level was about half the high water mark. So, and after this year, so 6 months from now, you wouldn't have had to do anything in these programs, and a lot of districts plan to cut them completely. So as a result of the state putting in new money, both of these programs should survive, adult ed and career tech, both of which are hugely important to your community. We have a generation of kids that for the past 7 years has been way underfunded on their regular education. And if we were to deny them these avenues that we use for transitions, then they'd be shortchanged for the rest of their life. It'd be the same kids that got shortchanged in regular K-12, and then all of a sudden we take away the avenues that would allow them to catch up. So the governor, we think, has done a great service by continuing that money. If you go to the next slide on career tech, this is where we talk about the $250 for 3 years. Priorities given to LEAs that are working in partnerships. LEA means local education agency. It means school districts. It is a grant program, but it's a matching program. So you have to put up some of the money you're currently spending as a match. That should not be a problem for you. But the idea is that over time, the governor wants to see more career tech, and he wants to see the program grow back to the way that it was 5 years ago. And he's willing to put up some money to do that. Districts in the aggregate are spending about $250 now. This other $250 in matching funds would bring it back up to $500. That $500 is about where the districts were in 2007-8, before the cuts were made. Okay? If we keep going, because I want to be sure we have plenty of time for discussion and questions. The block grant for adult ed, I talked a little bit about that $500 million. It doesn't take away anything that you currently have. So your old adult ed money was folded into your LCFF grant, and you get to keep all of that. This is over and above that, and it is the amount that you had as maintenance of effort. So if you had $6 million as maintenance of effort, you're going to get another $6 million. The $6 million you get is part of a block grant and has to be spent on adult ed. The $6 million that you were spending is now your money, and you can decide whether to spend it on adult ed or something else. But adult ed,
This is ongoing funding?
it is, and it's ongoing, and so your adult ed program for next year will not compete with your regular K-12 programs anymore. This year it does. Okay? So over time, the governor wants these consortiums to be formed. There will be, like I said, a board within the community that will advise the state on how this money should be allocated. The administrative costs are held down. The money goes to the community colleges with an agreement that the chancellor and the superintendent of public instruction will allocate that money jointly. For 15-16, you get your MOE. So you get that $6 million or so for sure for the first year, and then you go through the process for the second year and beyond. You should compete really well for that. Okay? All right, so we've got new money coming in several different areas, and I've talked about some of them. Let's keep going. This one isn't new money, this is new costs. So the two retirement systems, CalPERS and CalSTRS, are both going up, and they're going up pretty dramatically. They double over the 7-year period. You are getting no new money to cover those costs.
What slide are you on right now?
I'm sorry, I'm on 10? Are we on 10? Okay. All right. Okay, all right. I might have gotten one ahead. All right, and so we're on 10. Those two are doubling. So this is an important issue, and there's a consortium of districts that are taking on this issue. We at School Services are the advocates for that consortium, and let me just show you how this works. If you go to slide 11. So I said the governor promised $18.5 billion to restore our purchasing power to the 2007-8 level by 2021. So the top line on this graph shows $18.5 billion. But if the governor doubles the cost of STRS and PERS for us during that time, we get a bill that was not anticipated in his calculation of how much he owes us. And so we would actually only net 14.1. So we have a $4.5 billion ongoing loss of purchasing power.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
So does that mean, like on slide 4, that in these years you had from 2000, all the earlier years, there was really an additional $4 billion that was being paid for by the state? It doesn't show up here? Or not?
Okay, so that's partly right. In those years, there was an additional $4 billion in actuarial costs that should have been paid by somebody to PERS and STRS, but it wasn't paid at all.
Paid at all.
Wasn't paid at all, and that's how they fell $80 billion behind. Okay, so we at School Services believe strongly that the state needs to make up the deficits in STRS and PERS. We can't let that deficit sit out there, but to count it against the LCFF like this means that we have a $4.5 billion ongoing loss of purchasing power. So if you go to the next slide, slide 12, this is what we want the state to do. What we want the state to do is say, we've guaranteed $18.5 billion in purchasing power, and now in order for LCFF to be fully restored, you got to give us that $4 billion on top of that. And we're making some progress. I think that it is likely we will get something done on this.
Now, how is that going to impact in our district?
So what happens
that?
is, right now, when you get your new money from the state, and Janet does your budget, she puts in there, we're going to have to put up another X number of $1 million each year for STRS and PERS. Right, and so each year it goes up, and it goes up substantially. And your employee organizations are impacted because that money comes out of the base grant, and it's 1.7%. So if your base grant goes up 5%, but 1.7 goes to this, that takes a lot of money off the table that could have been salaries. And so our proposal says the state funds the STRS and PERS separate from LCFF, and the amount that you would get would be net of the STRS increase. You would not have to pay that. The state would be paying it. So, but the main thing is we don't want a permanent $4.5 billion loss in purchasing power that, you know, let me just talk a little bit about how STRS and PERS got in trouble. So the state sets by law the amount the employer contributes. The state sets by law the amount the employee contributes. The state sets by law how much employees get when they retire. The state manages the money for the careers of these employees. This is a totally state-controlled system, but it's a political system. And so in good years, the state increased benefits without increasing revenues to the fund. And over time, those increased benefits have caused the fund to go negative and now need this restoration of money. The state controls this whole thing, and then when there's a problem, they hand it off to the school district. Okay, now I'm not in Sacramento, so I can use a 4-letter F word. It isn't fair. right? I don't even talk about fair in Sacramento because it doesn't mean anything, but it should mean more here. And so we think that it's fair, instead of the state, I mean, when the state levies this cost on the district, they're levying it on the employee, right? I mean, this money that goes to STRS competes with money that could be used for salaries for employees. And so we are working with the state to try to get them to adopt a solution that looks like this. It would take longer for LCFF to be fully implemented. Maybe they're way ahead of the game. They might still make 2021. But we want them to, when they say they're fully implemented, we want 18 and a half, not 14.
So that means that we're, right now, though, until that passes, if that passes, we have to prepare as if we have to reserve that money now.
Yes, you do.
Okay.
And it's a substantial amount for your
Right,
district.
wow.
Okay? So I wanted you to see that because this is a byproduct of getting the retirement funds well, is that the state has shifted the whole thing to the school district. There's a small increase for employees directly, a small increase for the state, but the employer rate more than doubles. So that's, the state has basically said school districts have got to pay it. Okay, so let's look at your district a little bit. I'm going to use 1314 as a base, and are we on the right slide? Okay, so over on the left side, that's how much money you got in 1314 per student in 2013-14. If you go to the right side of the slide, that's the amount that you're going to get in 2021. So where it says LCFF 1415 target, that is the 1415 target as of, it is 2021 as of 1415. And we call it the 1415 version of 2021 because 2021 goes up every year for COLAs. Okay, so, all right, so the middle one, 1415, is how much you're getting for the current year. So what you're getting is $1,132 more than you got last year. Everybody see that kind of in the middle there? Of that 1,132, about 320 is to the base, 812 is supplemental services. So the 320 to the base you can spend for anything you want to. That's discretionary money to the board, can be used any way the board would like to use it. The 812 in supplemental and concentration grants, those dollars must be spent to increase and improve students for programs for students. So those are basically being spent in accordance with your LCAP, your Local Control Accountability Plan. So by the time we get to 2021, your total, and I'm just going to look at the math on the right-hand side and show you how to read that. Your total in 2021 is to be $11,263. That's not what you're getting now. That's what you get in 2021.
Say that again?
I'm sorry?
Never mind.
Okay. So you've got a gap of $38.85. The state for the current year funded 29.15% of the gap. And so that was $1,132. That's the addition to the middle bar. Okay, that's the gain for the current year. Of that, when the state funds 29.15% of the total, it funds 29.15% of the blue bar on the right-hand side first. So that 3,034 was funded at 29.15% for $812, and so that's how we get the split between the 812 and the 320. Now my numbers come from the statewide database, and they are exactly wrong, but they are approximately right. If Janet were to do this slide, she would be maybe $5 different per student, but her number would be righter than mine because she would use more current data. She would use the number of students that you have today. I'm going back a few months on how many students you have. So you shouldn't be surprised if it's a little bit different when your district does it, but conceptually, a target of $11,263. The district I'm going to be in tomorrow has a target of $8,000. $8,000, right? you will be more than $3,000 ahead of that district. And when the superintendents in those districts bellyache about that, and the board members, you know, San Bernardino is going to get 3,000 more than we're going to get, I tell them, if I told you, you go to San Bernardino, and I'll give you an extra $3,000 per kid, but you have to guarantee the performance that you're getting in this affluent district, would you take that deal? And they all go, no, I would not. Okay? Because this 3,000, this 11,263 still leaves you way under the national average.
Yes.
Okay? And so we're going to try to educate our highest need students with something that is way below the national average. And you're not going to get that amount of money until 2021. We're ramping up to it.
So
right?
let me ask you a question. Is that,
Yes, sir.
So I'm clear on this. So are you saying that this middle bar with the yellow and the purple,
Yep.
is that what we received this current fiscal year?
Yes, it is, for 14, 15.
All right.
And
then
you're ramping up to the right-hand bar.
what does ramping up mean, though?
That means each year you're moving toward
Okay,
that.
so
bar.
for next year, based on those numbers you gave us,
Mhm.
where are we going to be at for 20?
So if you will flip the page to page 14, okay, on page 14, this is 15, 16. So for 15, 16, you're getting an additional $941. On top of that 1,100 I just showed you. 290 goes to the base. That little gray box is the most important box on here for you. The rest of it's showing you how the math works.
Okay.
But the little gray box, 290 goes to the base, 651 goes to programs that increase and improve services for students. That's your LCAP money. So let me just put it into perspective. When we go to the negotiations, for example, I say to the bargaining teams, both of them, the increase in the base grant is on the table for bargaining. It's on the table for the board to use. That is totally discretionary money. But if you're going to spend some of the concentration and supplemental grant money, it has to be tied to the LCAP. So the students have to get more. So could that increase compensation? Yeah, it could increase compensation. So for example, if you said one of our principles that we believe in our LCAP is professional development. We're going to add 2 days to the school year for professional development, and we're going to use our LCAP money to pay for it. You can do that. And so you could add a % to the salary schedule if you wanted. Yes, ma'am.
So if the supplemental concentration money has to go to the students, then we can only use the base for the STIRS and PERS, correct?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So we would say the STIRS and PERS increase does not change programs for students and has to come out of the base. And that's
has
why
to
I
come
said
out
it
of the
really
base.
impacts your pay raises.
No, you're saying that's because the law says that?
Yes,
The law says that?
the law says that. The law says that to use the supplemental and concentration grants, the students have to get more. Okay? So,
Ron,
Yes.
so our reserve can only come out of the base as well.
so the reserve, you're probably going to end up with 2 reserves. The way mechanically districts, that I've advised districts to do it, is, so you're going to get for next year $651 per student for supplemental and concentration grants.
Correct.
So initially, you're going to have a plan to spend it, but you won't have spent it. So I say put that 651 in a reserve, and then as you implement your LCAP initiatives, take the money out of the reserve and put it where that initiative goes, right?
So we could do the reserve for our students?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
And at the end of the year, for this year, for example, I don't expect that you will spend all of your LCAP money because you had to go from a standing start to creating all of these new
Right.
programs.
So that reserve, though, is for students. It can't be spent for anything else.
That's correct, but who decides whether it's for your students? The board in the adoption of the LCAP.
Okay.
But
And
the-
so,
The only thing we
Yes.
ever used money in a reserve for during bad times is to mitigate layoffs, because majority of your money is spent on salaries.
right,
So, I mean, to say that, I mean, when you say it's spent on students is still salaries. to to a large extent.
But what this means is additional services, not the existing services.
No, but Dr. Flores said you're going to set this aside for students as though you're talking about these additional services. When you talk about a reserve in terms of getting through tough times, you got to weigh, the only tough part about losing money is you have people that are on full time
Right.
and an ongoing cost, and you got to find a way to reduce those costs. And the only thing a reserve is going to help you do is buy time, so maybe you can not have to let as many people because of attrition and folks leaving.
So let me explain that, because I spent about 5 minutes talking about reserves a little while ago, and that was the reserve for economic uncertainties, and that was the reserve you're talking about
Right.
to protect you during bad times.
Right.
This reserve that I'm talking about is far different. You can establish a reserve to buy a new computer system. You can establish a reserve to buy textbooks. This reserve, what I'm saying is that you're planning now to get $650 per kid next year, and that is new spending that doesn't appear anywhere in your budget now. And you've got a local control accountability plan that should spend $650. And so until you spend it, I would hold that in a separate reserve, because the question was, can we have a reserve for the supplemental and concentration? Yes, you can. And if you don't spend it all, because this year I don't think you will spend it all, it carries right over into the next year, and then you add the $650 a student to it.
So we have a situation where our QEIA money is going to sunset. So we could use that money to reduce class size and keep the teachers, because it is a service to our students.
You could do that, because when your district has as high a percentage of students as you do, you can do things across the board. A district with 20% cannot do things across the board. They can't add staff development days for everybody. They're very restricted in how to spend that money. For you, you can spend it across the board. One of your neighbors, not far from here, used the base grant to do a pay raise for everyone. And when they took the base grant increase, took out step and column, health and welfare, the STRS increase and so on, that raise came out to be 1.05%. Then what they did is they went to the teachers and said, we want to add, I think it was either 15 or 20 minutes a day to the instructional day, and we're willing to pay 3.95% for that. So the teachers got a 5% raise made up of additional services for students plus money out of the base grant. That is perfectly legitimate. The students got more. Who decides whether they're getting enough for their money? The board, when they adopt the LCAP.
And I think it's good because our kids do need that extra services. And, then the teachers would get the additional raise. But our kids need tutoring. Our parents are just want more tutoring. And I think that would be perfect.
So if you and I were to sit down and say, what does it take to give students in this district a fair chance to catch up?
Right.
We would want lower class sizes. We
Correct.
would want more time with our highly professional teachers.
Yes.
We would want better instructional materials. We'd want better use of technology. We'd want better articulation between grade levels. We'd want more remedial services and interventions for students. And over time, over 7 years, you'll have enough money to do a lot of that, but you're going to have balance in every year. Some districts are saying we're going to do it all in class sizes. Some are saying we're going to do it all in more time. But what I preach is, for a high-level district like yours, do some balance. Do some of everything. Keep up with your employee compensation. One of the things that you're going to want to be able to do is attract the best and brightest. And so you might have to do some things in compensation. And if you're going to use the supplemental and concentration grant money, students have to get more. So you have to figure out a way that students get more and the salaries go up. And there are lots of ways to do that.
Okay, great.
Question, this will help me. On these 3 bars that you have, going back to this slide with this retirement cost, the STRS, how much per student comes out of this?
I haven't figured it out per student, but it's a substantial amount.
So you know how much- you know what it
And
is?
it does come out of that. So please.
I don't have it on a per-student basis either, but I can tell you that the beginning of 14-15, the original cost increase for STRS and PERS was about $3 million. It did get adjusted downward a little bit at the beginning of the year, so it was about 2, but looking as we move forward, it does increase close to $3 million each year for us.
So $3 million divided by
2015.
50,000 students, right?
Right, then you're saying 6 million out of
60 bucks.
2015, 2016?
Cumulatively, yes.
And then for 2015, 2016, does it go up again another 3 million? So it's
Goes up
9
every
million?
year.
It's going up every year. It's been, I don't recall the actual numbers year by year, but it was substantial. It was between 2 and 3 million each year.
And I think that's important only because, I mean, I like to look at new money as new money. But if I know they gave me new money, but they took money away at the same time,
Yes.
I think it's clear that everybody understands that.
So for 15-16, I'm on slide 14, you're getting 290 in the base grant, and just the rough math, 3,050,000 students, it'd be $60. So 20% of your new money is going to go to pay your STRS bill. Your PERS bill is also on top of that. So the PERS is an additional amount. So that's why I say it takes money off the table that was discretionary money for salary increases and other things, and we're working really hard to get that out of there.
So just for clarity, the base is discretionary, but we should take the STRS and PERS off and then know what we have as a board.
Exactly.
And then the supplemental concentration is for our kids, for programs and so forth. And when you talk about reserves, that's what you mean by 2 reserves, one with the concentration and supplemental monies that we can
Yes.
use for class reductions, class size reduction, and additional services. So we'll know how much we have for that. So that's good.
So when I talk
Just for
about
clarity, just for clarity.
Right,
Okay.
2 reserves. One is for that economic uncertainty, the
Right.
next disaster from the state.
Right.
And then one is a holding tank for the money for your kids
Right.
until you're ready to implement
Right.
those programs.
So the base, we'll have to decide how much of that after we, allocate for PERS and STRS, how much of that we'll put in reserves, and then after that is what we have left for discretionary.
That's right.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay? All right, so it's getting dark outside. Let me be sure I get through all this before you start your board meeting. So the governor has proposed an additional funding source for next year. I'm on slide 15. And it's discretionary funds. Now, the governor likes to call it discretionary funds, and it truly is discretionary, but it's another example of the governor trying to get a twofer here. He's paying for this out of mandate money that is owed to the district. This money is totally unrestricted. It's one-time money, so you can't use it for anything that eats because you won't be able to feed it the next year, right? But this one-time money is good money for reserves if you want to use your ongoing money for something else. But it's $180 per student. It is totally discretionary to you. You'll hear the governor say, I gave the districts money they could use for Common Core. Well, yeah, you could use this for Common Core. This is the money he's talking about, but you're not required to. So it is discretionary to you. It is one-time money. Okay? And this is $1 billion, $1.1 billion for the state. So when I said the governor is using money on a one-time basis, and then later he puts it on as ongoing, that's what that is. Okay, so now I'd like to get to just a little bit on LCFF and negotiations. And I'd like everybody just to, this isn't about your negotiations, this is about negotiations in general. So over on the left hand of the slide under revenue limits, the old system, down at the bottom we had the base revenue limit, and every year we were supposed to get a COLA. If you've been on the board less than 7 years, you've never seen a COLA. I go in to negotiate. I spend almost every day in school districts. When we go into negotiations, I ask the people on both teams, has anybody ever negotiated a pay raise before? Well, most of them haven't. They've been on the negotiating team 5 years and have never negotiated a pay raise, right? So on either side of the table. But back in the good old days when we actually got COLAs, that money was available for pay raises, and a lot of our districts, that's what they based formulas and things on. The categorical programs that we had in place, the money was restricted to those categorical programs that didn't go on the negotiating table. We never negotiated that money. Now we go to the right-hand side of the chart. The base grant looks a lot like the base revenue limit. It's not exactly the same, it's not computed the same, it's a lot bigger because it's the base revenue limit plus 40 programs. So there's a lot more money in the base grant. But the increase in the base grant is always available to you for any purpose the board would choose, any discretionary purpose. And it is, the increase is fully available to the bargaining units to demand to negotiate that money, okay? The targeted funds are not restricted, but they must result in an improvement in services for students. So the bargaining unit or the district, if you want to spend some of this money, should ask the question, how will this benefit students? So if the bargaining unit comes to you and says, we want 2 extra days of staff development, and we believe that that professional preparation will benefit students, and the board agrees, you can pay it out of the targeted money. And you can add those 2 days to the salary schedule, and a day is worth a little more than 0.5%. You increase the salary increase by 1%. If the bargaining unit says, we'd like some collaboration time, we're willing to work 2 hours a week extra for collaboration, but we want to be paid for it. If the board agrees, put it on the salary schedule. There has to be a nexus to programs for students. It doesn't necessarily have to be instructional minutes. It can be building capacity within the system. What you would not be able to do is say, we're going to use our targeted money to give an across-the-board raise, and nobody has to do anything different for kids. You would not be able to do that. Okay, so I think maybe thinking about it in those 4 quadrants helps. So if I shift now to this year, this was the first year of the LCFF. So at the CSBA, California School Boards Association conference last month, I did a new board member workshop. There were 700 new board members elected. We had 450 in the room. And I asked the question, how many of you have 20 years experience with the LCFF? And I started seeing some hands going. I said, don't raise your hands. It's only 1 year old, right? So no one has 20 years worth of experience. We all have a maximum of 1 year experience. And so this table shows you what the state did during that first year, culminating with the adoption of the first LCAPs in June of 2014. So remember what's going to happen in the future. Every June, when you adopt the budget, you're going to re-adopt the LCAP. You're going to drop the old year. It's a 3-year plan. So you're going to drop last year. You're going to add a new year. The 4th year now becomes the 3rd year. You're going to amend the plan to show your successes and areas where you want to change the emphasis. You're going to amend the plan if the amount from the state goes up or down. You're going to amend the plan based on the needs of your students. You could decide the priorities are different. A lot of districts like yours will start 10 new programs, and then they'll evaluate them. And when they evaluate them, they'll say, these 6 are solid programs. These 2 are superior programs. These 2 are not getting it done. And so the 2 that are not getting it done either get fixed or they're out and something else is in. You do that every single year. So the staff goes through the process of meeting with bargaining units, meeting with the community. The superintendent has to respond to comments from the community in writing, and then the board adopts the plan. That's your plan for the next year. You're going to do that every single year, right? So that starts with this last year in 2014. And we're on slide 18 now. We look to the future, and the state board has some work to do. So the state board is going to readopt the regulations, but we don't expect them to change at all. They're going to give you an evaluation rubric that says this is how you have to determine whether or not these programs are succeeding for your students, and you'll have to fill those rubrics out. If we go to slide 19, basically the purpose of these rubrics is to allow you to sort those programs out. Which ones are superior programs? Which ones are satisfactory and which ones need to change? So the state wants you to do that in an organized way. The county superintendents are given a lot of authority to review and approve your LCAP. There's never been one rejected because Johnny can't read. They get rejected because the dollars in the budget don't match the dollars in the LCAP, or the minimum requirements haven't been met, you didn't hold all the hearings, and those kinds of things. You will not fall into that trap in this district. So, but after 3 years, so let me just start again. For the first 3 years, you spend the money the way you think is most effective. At the end of that 3 years, the state now looks at an evaluation of your student performance. And so they have an organization that they're creating that looks like the Fiscal Crisis Management Assistance Team, but for instruction. And if your district is not meeting the goals, let me start on a positive note. If you're meeting the goals for student achievement, nobody cares how you spend your money. Your plan is working. And so you will not get a visit from the state. The 60 Minutes truck will not pull up in front of your district or any of that stuff, right? But if your students are not achieving at a higher level, then the state will be in here with the county saying, show us how you're spending your money. We're going to help you. We're going to help you to decide how to spend your money. And they'll use the term help. But when I was with the Air Force Inspector General team, and I would come into the command post over here at Norton Air Force Base at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I would hand the duty officer a card that says, summon the wing commander. We are beginning an operational readiness inspection. And the wing commander would shake my hand. He would say, Colonel, we're glad to see you. And I would shake his hand and say, Colonel, we're here to help you. Those are the two biggest lies ever told. I was not there to help him, and he was not glad to see me. And if the state sends somebody over here because they don't like your instructional program, those two lies will be told, but then you'll move on to a very negative circumstance. So you want to be sure that you self-police, that you make sure that you do the assessments. And if these programs are working, do more of them. And if they're not working, you correct it.
Have they decided, in the past, I mean, we've been through something similar like this when they did the school improvement grants, but all that was based on test scores.
Yes.
Is it going to be the same thing?
No. So you get, in this, that's a great question, because the state is also changing the testing system, but all of the assessments are based on multiple measures, and your district does a great job with multiple measures. You have more measures, I think, than anybody around because of the number of programs that you have run for all these years, state programs, federal programs, local programs, grant programs. So you have lots of measures out there, and you get to select which ones you're going to use, and then you need to consistently apply them to the assessment of your programs.
And who's gonna run this?
So
What department at the state?
So the district does this, and then when those evaluations are done, the County Office of Education and the State Superintendent of Public Instruction are responsible for looking at the districts. So you could think of it like this. You're going to see an array of districts, and it's going to be 1,000 districts in the state. And they're going to look and they're going to say, regardless of how much money these districts got, we're showing student achievement in the top 500. We're showing lower student achievement in the next 300, and in 100 or 200 districts, we may have gone backwards. You know, sometimes maintaining where you are in the face of changes in demographics, maintaining where you are can be a high goal. And so, but then we're going to see some that are going backwards. And those ones that are going backwards are going to become the object of the state's affection. And they're going to say, we need the state to go in there and the county and figure out why they are going backwards. So you don't want to be one of those. But I don't think you will be one of those. I mean, I think,
Ron,
yes.
whatever we decide those measures are, is what we will base our I guess, our performance on.
So the rubric will tell you some things about the measures. You will adopt the measures at the same time you adopt the LCAP. It is part of the LCAP.
Right.
So you'll define how you're going to assess,
Right.
and it'll be in accordance with, parallel with that rubric, and then you'll apply that each year to determine how you're doing. You know, I have legislators that ask me already, we've had this program for a year, when are we going to see some results? Well, we had the old one for 40 years. and I'm not sure we like the result. But 2 or 3 years down the road, you will see a result. And, I mean, is it fair to look at just the first year where you got the money at the last minute and had to put in the plan at the last minute and start the programs from a standing start, and there's no good effective assessment or anything? No. But 2 or 3 years down the road, what I say to legislators is, you don't have to wait for the test results. Ask a teacher. The teachers in your classrooms every day, they'll tell you whether students are doing better or not. And we get to use multiple measures, so they get to use their judgment as well. And so you don't have to wait 2 years to find out how your kids are doing. People in your classrooms, at your schools, your principals, they have their finger on the pulse all the time. They know whether kids are doing better or not. So will you. Okay, so the LCAP on slide 20 continues to evolve, and there's an evaluation rubric for the vision for what in that green panel to align the LCFF with the principles you have for instruction. Then there's a rubric for the concepts to use the LCFF and LCAP as a tool for improving student performance. And then finally, there's an evaluation rubric over the activities that you will use. And those activities, again, you set them in your LCAP, but this rubric tells you how to evaluate them. And so that's coming from the state board. So the State Board of Education provides that guidance, and then the state superintendent and the county offices oversee what you do.
So the rubrics will come from the state board for
Yes, it
each
will.
one of these categories?
Yeah,
Okay.
well, this is the rubric I showed about 4 slides back, that the state board is in the process of adopting that, and so the rubric will come from the state board.
When we went through the other process with the QIA schools and SIG schools, we did find out the additional funding made a difference in the performance of the students. So that, to me, is another concern, because I'm sure we're not going to get credit for having reserves in lieu of performance. So I think it's important, too, for the board to realize you have to spend money to get the results. I understand what you're talking about in terms of wanting to have reserve financially speaking, but the thought of not reaching your goals in terms of performance and then realize you have an extra $30 or $40 million over above what is required in reserves because you're expecting one of your 2 out of 8 recessions. That is something that's a responsibility we'd have to accept if we chose to go in that direction.
Right.
So, and I have a real concern about that, because I do believe that money makes a huge difference in educating our kids.
And so do I.
And increasing the performance of the kids. And money in reserves does not help those students.
So I'll take a minute and tell you a story. There was a period of time when I was both the chief business official and the superintendent for a district. And so we were talking about our reserve levels, and we were talking about spending money. And we had a proposal to spend some money on student programs. And so I was sitting in the superintendent's chair, and I said, before the board decides what to do with this item, I'd like you to hear from our chief financial officer. And so I got up out of the chair, and I went over and sat in the chief business official's chair. And I said, okay, I'm going to explain to the board all the reasons why we might want to hold on to some of this money. And I went through all the good reasons why we should hold on to some of the money. And then I came back over and I said, I'd like now for you to hear from the superintendent. And so as the chief business official, I've said we're going to hold on to the money. Let me explain to you now why we're not going to do that. Okay? And I said, as superintendent, we need to put this money in the classrooms for our students right now. And we have an adequate reserve. And even though our chief business official, when asked about reserves, what is an adequate level? More. It will always be more, right? There's a point where you have to, as a board, say, enough reserves, put that money over here and lock it away. Once you have an adequate reserve, you can spend it all. As long as you never open the box with a reserve in it, you can spend all of the new money for the next year, and you put it into programs. but you've got your reserve set aside. You don't have to add to the reserve ever again, as long as you don't take anything out. You don't have to put anything back. It's your savings account. So I think that, again, the answer is balance. You want to spend all the new money on kids, and if you've got an adequate reserve right now, you can do that. If you don't have, you could build it up over a couple of years. You don't have to do it all at once, but there is no substitute for an adequate reserve. That's what protects your employees and your students during that next downturn.
Thank you, Ron. I really appreciate your time. It's kind of like clarifying butter. You know how the clearer stuff comes to the top? Well, you kind of took us out of the muck and brought us up to a little bit of clear water. So thank you so much for that. I know there's a lot of people who have questions, and I also know that we're going to be starting our school board meeting in 10 minutes. So if you can keep your questions very, very succinct and short, and the answers also, please.
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to entertain some questions for the public. I know Abigail, and then Peg, would you like to come up to the microphone when she's done? Thank you.
Well, I know what was not mentioned here, and I know the special ed is in a different pocket of money. Was there any mention of special ed receiving additional funding? Because I know that's one area, and the accountability piece. Are they looking at how to sustain the program, because we need that money? I don't know if there was anything mentioned in the state.
So there is. The special ed is not included, as you said, with the LCFF, and it is getting the cost of living adjustment, 0.83% for the current year and 1 point something for next year. And so I think that's a pitiful contribution for the state
Yes.
to add to special ed, but that's all they're adding.
And there's no advocacy work with that piece for them to receive
Oh, there's
more
all
money?
kinds of advocacy work, but it isn't going anywhere right now.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Ms. Tracy?
Could you comment briefly on the implications of the grade span adjustment in terms of where a district of our type has to go when we've had both SIG schools and QEIA schools, where we may have reduced some of our classes, but not have reduced all of them?
Okay, so I'm going to talk about grade span adjustments, and I'm going to dispense with one very quickly. The 9-12 career technical education grade span adjustment, I don't think is what you're talking about. I think you're talking about the K-3. Okay, so in the K-3, as you get more money, if you get 28% or 32% or whatever it is of the gap closure, you're supposed to go down in class sizes toward 24. For most districts, that progress comes a student a year or something like that to get down to 24. If you have a collectively bargained agreement to stay at a higher level, you can stay at the higher level. You don't have to make that progress. But if you don't have that agreement and you don't make the required progress, and it's measured school by school, if one school fails, you lose all of the grade span adjustment for all schools. So you cannot afford to have a school fail. So you either have to have the collective bargained agreement, or you have to make sure they all pass. You have a negative on the QEIA schools, because the QEIA schools were all much lower than 24, and you've got to keep them there. So the
Yes.
state basically says those schools have to stay there even though you're not getting the QEIA money. So that will cost you some additional teachers that you will have to have over and above your neighbors. Now, so in a way that is a negative, but at the same time, because you have 94% of your students generating more money, you were likely to want to increase class or decrease class sizes anyway. So it forces you to do something you might have wanted to do anyway, but it might be at a different pace than you might have wanted to do it. Okay?
Okay. Thank you so much. And Dr. Marson, would you like to add anything since you were joining us?
Well, Ron, one, I wanted to say thank you. Your voice is always real credible in this community and among the folks in this room, and appreciate your being here. I've heard varying numbers about when the recovery, the economic recovery began. I think I heard 2009. I don't know how that really plays
So
out.
the feds say the recession was over in June of 2009, but it certainly doesn't feel like it because our growth rate has been about half normal growth since then.
Right. And my question for you is, when do you anticipate the next downturn?
So the state of California says, the LAO and the Department of Finance both say 2019. I think 2016 or 17 is much more likely.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you all. Enjoy your board meeting.
Thank you.